Hello and welcome to Pop Screen, part of the Geek Show podcast network. We are that corner of the Geek Show that likes to look at the good, the bad, and the ghoulish of movies, either starring, about, or by pop stars. No, the podcast covers a broad range of musical and cinematic genres, from country and western to hip-hop, from documentaries to science fiction. And this month, it's Halloween month, so we've got a month of horror ahead of you. I'm your host, Graham Williamson. I'm a short filmmaker, and I also write for The Geek Show, of course, as well as Byline Times and We Are Cult. And I've been joined by...
Robyn Adams, who is actress, writer, all-round she-freak, and the person you don't want to see on a pop screen episode, because it always bodes well.
Yes. Yeah, we've reviewed 2 horror movies so far, and indeed 2 horrible movies so far.
Indeed. I will never forget Embrace of the Vampire, as long as I live.
I don't think I would have inflicted that on someone if I'd have watched it beforehand.
This is what happens when you get me in to do episodes. But on the one hand, when I'm brought on, I have a slight feeling, oh, this is going to be something bad. But there's also the fact that, something's going to go down if I watch this film.
Well, this time I would say it's a better class of trash, right?
It is a better class of trash. The thing about The Comeback is there are things about The Comeback which make me really want to love it. I really want to adore this film. And the things which I love about it aren't in it enough. It's a more simple kind of thing.
It's not like a thing where the entire foundation of the film is misguided, which is certainly the case with Embrace of the Vampire.
Oh, there is, believe it or not, there is a cinematic parallel between Embrace of the Vampire and The Comeback, which we will undoubtedly get onto later when discussing one of the weirder aspects of this weird film.
Yeah, actually, yes, I think I've just worked out what it is. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Things happen in The Comeback.
Choices are made. But I'd wanted to do this for a while, and I know you were particularly excited to do this because it's a Pete Walker film, right?
It's Pete Walker, yes. Director of such titles as House of Whipcord, House of Mortal Sin, and one of my personal favourites of pretty much all British horror, not just of the 70s, Frightmare, starring Sheila Keith, who is also in this.
She is, yes.
She definitely is in this.
I always used to get Pete Walker mixed up with Norman J. Warren, and I've seen a lot more Norman J. Warren films now, and I don't make that mistake anymore.
I mean, they're kind of part of that same kind of wave of kind of 70s British horror, because there's an interesting thing which will undoubtedly be brought up later, is the fact that in the 70s, British horror had this massive boom, this unprecedented boom, and there's something between like the Hammer, the Amicus, the kind of gothic stuff, and kind of the precursor to what would lead to the slasher films of the 1980s.
Yes.
So towards the end of the 70s, mid to late 70s, you start to see this pleasing kind of Grand Guignol combination of kind of slightly rougher edged, but still gothic and stylish British horrors, which kind of up the gore, up the sleaze, up the salaciousness, And there's kind of this nice middle ground between these two things. It promises some brilliant wave to come, and it never happened because Thatcher era Britain was like devoid of horror films and pretty much killed off the entire UK horror scene until like the 2000s.
Yes,
So it's kind of
absolutely.
it's a promise of a wave of horror we never got, and
No,
it's
you cannot overestimate what the Video Recording Act did to the British film industry. I mean, it wiped out horror movies in this country for about a generation. I did a horrified article a few years back about the British films that appeared on the Video Nasties lists prepared by the Department for Public Prosecutions. And they're interesting because you realise that exploitation directors in the 60s and 70s were kind of like the artist in exile. You know, people like James Kennel Clark and Warren and Walker were making various cuts of these films with the knowledge that the one that they thought was good, the one that they thought was scary enough, would probably be for export only because anything sufficiently strong would not be permitted by the BBFC. And it's sort of sad and it's sort of ridiculous. I mean, there were a lot of artists creating work for an overseas market in 1970s Europe, but the ones in Eastern Europe were writing about re-education camps, and the ones in Britain were writing sort of, "What, you don't get much of them for £1, do you?" Because they're a fundamentally unserious country.
Indeed. I, I think unserious is a word which could be used at numerous points in numerous Pete Walker films. Apart from maybe House of Whipcord, which is a horrifying indictment of capital punishment and the prison system.
House of Whipcord is the one where the villain is a judge, right? Am I
Yes,
remembering that? Yeah,
I believe so. Played by Sheila Keith, if I'm not wrong.
of course. Yes.
I have not actually seen that one. I hate to admit, but I've only seen Frightmare and The Comeback. And Frightmare is phenomenal and also really, really unserious. I love reading people's reviews of Frightmare saying it's one of the darkest, grimmest, nastiest horror films of the 70s. And you watch it and it's the good life, but they eat people. It's, it's really, really quirky and whimsical and strangely light-hearted. And I think that disturbs people. But
Yeah.
I just think it's strangely sweet, and Sheila Keith really makes that film. She's an absolute horror icon. She should be on the levels of Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing and the likes, but she just didn't have many roles.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I thought she was great in this, certainly.
Oh
I think she
yeah,
was having the time of her life in
she is
this.
the highlight of this, and I will gush about her performance in this later, because regardless of my thoughts otherwise on The Comeback, Sheila Keith is phenomenal.
Well, it's one of those things that I'll put my cards on the table. I think the film is fine. You know, it's no great shakes. It's not as good
Yeah.
as Walker's best films, but you know, I enjoyed it. I had fun. It probably would not be something that I would hold in my memory for a long time, were it not for the fact that everyone in this film is so fascinating. And
Yes.
it gets to the point where even like the one scene bit parts, like the nurse who comes to administer to the hero when he's had a breakdown, is played by June Chadwick from This Is Spinal Tap.
I don't know what her deal is in
She's not
this.
very comforting, is she?
No, she's, to be fair, fairly accurate in the sense that she really isn't paid enough to be to have the nicest bedside manner. But it's quite funny that there's just a nurse working at this hospital who constantly, in spite of these long shifts on the NHS, looks like a supermodel.
Yeah. She looks like a supermodel or the girlfriend of a rock star who redesigns their tour with disastrous effects. Uh,
Yes.
yes. Yeah, she's really unpleasant. But she's also so perky. She just stands by his bedside going,
Yeah.
you went mental, didn't you?
I feel that. You see, I feel that. I highly, highly dig that.
Yeah, I think it's probably quite accurate as to mental health care in 1970s Britain as well.
Probably. Undoubtedly.
But we should talk first before we get into the unexpectedly stacked cast that this film has. We should talk first about Nick Cooper, played by Jack Jones, because he's a very odd central figure for this
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
movie, in my opinion.
I mean, the film was made to. There's obvious points where you can see the film was made to try and basically jumpstart an acting career for him, which never
Yeah.
really took off. The
Mm.
reasons why are slightly visible in the film, particularly because they decide, you know what we're going to do with this introductory film to the screen? Have a movie where he plays a washed-up pop star, and
Yes.
basically just like show how this guy has just completely failed to get work. I have to note that yes, I have been thinking of this film and this podcast episode for a while because it's the 70s proto slasher starring the man who did the theme for The Love Boat. I cannot overstate how that's a thing. And speaking of which, seeing as there's been a Fantasy Island horror movie, and sure,
Yeah.
who cares if it sucks? How about a Love Boat horror film?
Definitely.
It can
Yeah.
happen. It can still happen. I know that the Reverend Peter Laws at 40 Times is calling out for a Love Boat horror film. I know that he is calling for it, so the audience is out there. So I think we need that.
We absolutely do, and you could get Jack Jones in it. He's still
You could
alive.
get
He
Jack
still
Jones in it.
pops up from time to time. His acting career is sort of, it's kind of hilarious, but I also get the vibe from him that he would find it funny as well. Like he was in a disaster movie called Condominium, which for a
Was
start,
he now?
not a good title for a
But if your disaster movie has condom in the title, it's probably not an advisable choice.
But even worse, it came out in the exact same year as Airplane,
Oh
which,
no!
yeah. But Jack Jones also has a cameo in Airplane 2, which I think is very sporting of him, because he must have been at least slightly pissed off by that.
Indeed.
He's a, as you say, a washed up pop singer, and he is, as the title suggests, on the comeback trail. By the way, I found this. We were discussing. I found this on Amazon Prime under the title Encore. So I'm not sure if
Don't
you've
call it a
watched this
comeback.
yet. Yeah,
Call
do
it
not.
Encore because we changed the title. I don't know why they changed the title for Amazon Prime.
It's. I assume this is some old print that they couldn't be bothered to check, because what I was going to say, whatever you've watched it on, it is undoubtedly better than the 94th generation VHS copy shit that the world's richest man has uploaded to his website in
Certainly.
flagrant contempt for his customers.
Indeed.
But yeah, I don't know if I've watched the same cut as you, but I find it kind of interesting that part of this is going for a sort of archaic kind of theatrical gothic of the type that was briefly big after whatever happened to Baby Jane. It also wants to make you think that maybe this is a ghost story, and yet the hero is a character who is so modern. It's not just that he's a pop star, it's that he's a pop star who's been in the game for long enough to have had career slowdowns and revivals, which is the sort of thing that was only just starting to happen by the 70s.
He's quite an odd main character.
Yeah.
I've got to say it's the concept of the film is rather strange because sure you've got this thoroughly modern man who seems to lack charisma on a level where he just blends into the background. No offense to Jack Jones, but he's not exactly star material here. He looks the part, but there's something about him. And they just say, let's plonk him in a countryside mansion and hit him with ghosts in the middle of the night, do the haunting on him. And his reaction to it is mild bemusement half the time. Like fear that takes the form, fear and breakdown into actual insanity, which mostly take the form of less of a big reaction to seeing what appears to be the SpongeBob chocolate lady made out of burger meat in a wheelchair, which is a real scare. But I have seen in the film, there is a moment where he just opens his bedroom door at night and sees some kind of meat woman in a wheelchair.
That is unfortunately true, yes. But yeah, I suppose in his defense, being in a haunted mansion, but OK Computer was recorded in a purportedly haunted mansion. That's just a bit of pop trivia for you there. I just thought I'd throw that in. But being in a purportedly haunted mansion cannot be creepier than being involved in the 1970s British record industry. And boy, every time we go to the supporting cast, you see evidence of that.
The amount of characters who are just outright predatory in this film is really, really deeply concerning. Like, oh, here's my mate Harry. Oh, he's a good lad. He is not a good lad. He attempted to molest a woman in an elevator.
Harry is incredible. Played by Peter Turner, by the way, the actor, the Liverpudlian actor who had an affair with Gloria Graham in her later years. The film Stars Don't Die in Liverpool is based on his life. But at one point, he has the extraordinary line, that's the first thing I noticed about a woman, her breasts.
It's such a normal line. It's such a normal line. I don't know how to describe this character. I'm going to name drop here because he looks like a combination. He looks like a combination of Dylan Moran and Quentin Tarantino, and he speaks in an accent which is entirely implaceable and changes every second.
That's true, yes.
He confuses me on a fundamental level. He's also deeply suspicious in a way which leads you to believe he's a murderer, and he probably is, just not one relevant to the film, because he's just such a nasty individual. Like, he's spiteful.
Yeah, he's absolutely horrible. I think you're right about that accent too. I've seemed to have retconned that into a sort of estuary accent in my head, because in my head this is like maybe if Dudley Moore's Hollywood career didn't take off, he could play this as like an extension of Derek from Derek and Clive.
Yeah, I kind of feel that.
Yeah. He is horrible. I kept thinking of that Futurama line where Zach Brannigan says, I find that the most erotic part of a woman is the boobies.
Indeed. He also probably doesn't have very good hygiene because he takes no issue to a stream of dead flies coming through a keyhole at one point. And speaking of the keyhole, we need to talk about the apartment. I think it's time to talk about the apartment.
Let's go for the apartment. Yes.
Yeah. So, Jack Jones is living in a haunted mansion. He's not living in his old apartment, which is this lavish, like, peak of 70s style and fashion apartment, which is up an elevator in what appears to be an abandoned recording studio, in, like, this mass of, like, this colossal derelict warehouse. And I am deeply confused. And that is the parallel to Embrace of the Vampire, because it's not too far off the crumbling student house that the vampire lives in that.
I was thinking you were aiming at something else, which I think we'll end up discussing
undoubtedly.
But yeah, you're right. Yeah. It's like the building is clearly set to be demolished until this one last pop star moves out of his apartment.
There's like, it's a bizarre building. There's like a paper skeleton Halloween decoration on one of the doors.
It is, yeah.
But I I don't know if anybody listening will know of this, about something at the time of recording. I sent this to you, Graham, specifically because I knew I would bring it up. I may have
Oh,
sent it to you on Twitter, so you may not have seen it. But
oh
there's this
yeah. Sorry.
video which has been doing the rounds
Hmm.
of a man walking to his apartment, uh, but he just walks into what appears to be a maze of like derelict hallways until he
Right.
reaches his apartment. And I couldn't stop thinking of this man moving through the back rooms to get to his house, because that's exactly what happens in the comeback. That's
Are you
exactly the layout of
suggesting?
there.
Are you suggesting that Pete Walker has in fact invented liminal horror 40 years early?
I would sincerely debate that one. I'm pretty certain there are other examples, but I may have to give the credit there. But it's
Yeah.
just the thing which concerns me so much is how well kept the apartment looks for most of
Mm,
the beginning, and then you see that in the opening scene. Oh, my favorite detail. I'm. This is what I was getting to. It's possibly my favorite atmospheric detail to the film.
yeah.
Is that obviously the apartment was filmed in a completely different building to the derelict building, but you can hear this weird industrial creaking whenever the scenes are in that building, and it's really
Right.
weird and unsettling, and it reminds you of the fact that that's out there.
Yeah, yeah. I think that subtlety may have passed me by because of Jeff Bezos. But yeah, that is fascinating.
I mean, I may have watched an alternate cut because I watched the one with the title The Comeback.
The one that has a
So
correct
the
title,
correct
yes.
title. And it's basically, I don't know where to go from here because there is so much about this film, and I don't know where to start. Do we
Well, I
start with the
think
dead wife? Do we start with Sheila Keith? Who knows?
because that's the opening scene, isn't it? His wife goes back to this mysterious apartment to pick up some of his stuff, his estranged wife, and she is murdered by someone who will immediately elicit the reaction from you of, I don't know who's disguised, but that is obviously a disguise.
Yeah, and it's it's quite interesting because uh basically concept of this film, I will describe this. We have already touched on it, but I will describe the weirdness of this film's concept.
Mm,
It's washed up pop star records a new record in a haunted house. Meanwhile, seemingly unrelated, someone in a hag mask with a scythe is killing people at his old apartment.
yes.
Seemingly entirely unrelated. Uh, what I would never expect to happen in the opening to this film, if I hadn't already had an inkling from one of the posters, is that
Mm,
suddenly the wife gets jumped by someone dressed in a shawl with like a hag mask, who
yep.
just outright murders her with a scythe whilst like screaming. And it's kind of brilliant. There's kind of something nightmarish. It's the combo of kind of gothic with the kind of not yet formed slasher genre.
Yes.
It kind of comes together in this delightful Grand Guignol way, which never. I wish we got that 80s horror boom in the UK because
Yeah.
we could have seen more of that. And then the old lady mostly doesn't do much murdering for the rest of it.
Well, that is the thing, actually. That is one of the things that I think is quite savvy about this, as you say, very odd plot structure where things are happening and there is a hero and they're both in separate places. But, you know, because of the motive that we find out at the end, there can only really be like two main murders in this film, which isn't a lot
Indeed.
for a horror film, and it isn't a lot for a horror film directed by Pete Walker.
Indeed.
But the fact that this is happening somewhere where the hero isn't means that he can let the body sort of lie there undiscovered and decompose and get a really quite startling amount of gore out of this one killing.
It's truly disgusting. It's
It really
to the
is.
point that when the body is eventually discovered, there's like rats chewing on it. It's like, ugh. It's proper nasty. And as I mentioned, there were streams of dead flies coming through the keyhole,
Yes.
that's just vile.
Which, as you say, Nick's awful friend considers completely unremarkable. He's just going in and going, "Oh yeah, that's like when I have a dead woman in my flat. Yeah, I get
He
flies
turns
as
up
well."
and opens the door and says, "Oh, something smells." And I'm like, "No shit. How have you not noticed by this point?"
Yes.
But it's also noticeable that the body on the stairs of the wife is noticeably a more convincing effect than the abject, the abject horror that is the burger meat woman, which I can.
Yeah, what's the deal with that?
I don't know. It's never explained what she is.
Yeah. I guess the logic of it is that Nick is having visions that are supposed to lead him to discover his dead wife, and maybe the burger meat woman is just there to say to him, "Look, fucko, if you don't get a move on, I'm gonna look like this by the time you find me."
Yeah, I could refer to her as the hamburger lady because we're doing a music podcast. I could throw in the throbbing gristle reference. However, I've decided not to because it came in my head and I'm thinking, should I? Shouldn't I? Either way, she's made from burger meat. There is no
Yes.
other way to say it. She's got goofy dentures. It flash cuts between Jack Jones's face and the burger face, and it's the most confoundingly strange thing. And of course,
It's like the Kuleshov effect, isn't it? It's like
oh
if we
yeah,
cut between Jack Jones's face and this load of old meat, we might be able to persuade you he's having an emotional reaction to something.
yeah. And of course, we haven't talked about the people who own the house. Yeah,
Ah, which, yeah, Mr. and Mrs. B, which is
that's what they're
only,
called.
yeah, only the surface of what is weird about these
Oh
people, I
yeah,
would say. And this is
I
where
was.
we have to. I mean, I want to talk about Bill Owen a bit because Bill
Oh
Owen is
yeah,
in this as well. But
and
this is
he's
where we
superb as
do.
well.
He's superb. Yeah, Bill
Yeah,
Owen is someone who most listeners will probably know as Compo in the. I think still the longest running sitcom in history, in British history at least, Last of the Summer Wine. I recently saw him in Unfair, an agit-prop short designed to protest against Edward Heath's anti-union policies, directed by the avant-garde British novelist B.S. Johnson. But you know, he also played an old man in who had a matchbox that used to scare Nora Batty. So a varied career, I think, is what
indeed.
we're saying here. Yeah,
And he's in the
and
comeback.
he's in the comeback, and he's good. He's kind of he would slot very well because you and I have just been on the Uncut Network's podcast about James Whale. I think if anyone in the 70s was interested in doing a remake of The Old Dark House, he might have been able to do the Karloff part based on this.
Indeed.
Hmm.
And indeed, this is essentially a film of the old Dark House variety,
Yeah.
uh, in a way which will become more apparent as we say more about this. Uh, Complete with potential missing family member. Uh,
Hmm. Yeah.
yeah,
But
but
he's good, but I have cleared the floor to allow you to discuss Sheila Keith's
we need to talk
performance in
Sheila
this.
Keith. Oh
Yeah.
yes, if anybody doesn't know who Sheila Keith is, you need
Hmm.
to know who Sheila Keith is. Sheila Keith is basically she is the star of most of Pete Walker's films. Like, she doesn't always play the main character, but she is the abject star of them, the
Yes.
exact scene stealer. She's an older woman who plays these delightfully absurd roles, which
Mm.
are she delivers these intense performances with such gleeful sadism. It's wonderful, uh, and she's just an absolute star at playing these characters. But here, she seems to play someone a little bit different to begin with, because what we see is she is Mrs. B. And Mrs.
Yes.
B is the kindly old butler lady who, akin to The Haunting,
Hmm.
she's very similar to said butler character from The Haunting. Uh, she's there, but she's kind of weirdly warm to Jack Jones's
Yeah.
character, who I think is called Nick. I think
Yeah,
I
he
haven't
is.
brought it
Yeah.
up yet. Uh,
Yeah.
she's weirdly in the know about him. She knows all of his habits. She knows about how he needs a drink of brandy before he goes to bed at night because she reads all of like the teen gossip magazines. Because she's obsessed with him, and
Yes.
obviously this isn't fully where it goes. But I'm thinking this is oddly self-aware and almost too self-deprecating for the fact that this man's Jack Jones's peak fan base is this older woman living in a mansion in the countryside.
Yes.
It's this grandmother-looking woman who is obsessed with this young crooner sweetheart.
I
Uh,
mean, you've talked a lot about how this film anticipates later horror films, but when Mrs. B is making Nick at home feel at home, all I could think about was Misery.
oh yes, oh
Yeah.
decidedly so.
Mm.
There's a definite weird obsessed fan quality to her, and even to her husband in it, but
Yeah.
particularly her. And she is a bit odd. Like, during one of the haunting episodes, she comes downstairs and just stares, smiling from the dark, and then walks back up. I don't fully know why she does this. I think she's just fucking with him, which is mostly what she does. And she's you start to notice something suspicious when you feel like there's an air of malicious compliance here, because
Mm.
she's all too happy about some of the things which are happening. She walks in on him, uh, basically in the middle of some kind of sexual encounter with this woman who's been following him around and in the plot. And she just like stands there completely nonplussed, smiling, and say, "Do you need any drinks? Do you need anything?" It's just like,
Don't mind
no,
me.
that's off. She's doing something. For a record,
Yes.
Graham, have you by any chance seen the latest season of Inside Number 9?
Oh, I have, yes. Yeah.
I won't try and spoil anything, but I will make reference to the final episode from this season, because
Ah,
by the
yes.
end I realised they've got similar twists.
Yeah, that's very true, isn't it? I
I
think
wonder if it was an intentional influence, if it was a conscious influence upon it, because Reece Shearsmith and Steve Pemberton are massive on that era of British horror.
Oh God, yeah, I was
So
going to say every single British horror film of the 1970s, I would imagine Shearsmith and Pemberton have watched at some point. So yes,
indeed.
quite possible. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I love the twist here. I think that Shearsmith and Pemberton pull it off better,
Yeah.
but it's delightful here. And all due respect, Shearsmith and Pemberton, you don't have Sheila Keith
They
because
don't
she
know.
is just there's something about her, and the way she switches emotions is like Kathy Bates a little. Like it's
Yeah.
slower and it's more kind of it's not kind of on off shifts in the middle of a scene, but there is a moment where she leaves the room and talks to
Mm.
her husband, and there's an instant flip and she begins to cry, and it's superb.
Yeah. Yeah. I was not familiar with Sheila Keith. I think I have seen other Walker films, but it was so long ago. I saw them on VHS, so you know. Um,
It's
but
I.
Yeah,
I
she really
instantly,
impressed me here.
I instantly fell in love with her performances since I watched Frightmare, and there's a moment where she drills into someone and blood splashes on her face, and
Hmm.
completely improvised, she licks her lips, and I thought that was such a delightful little character quirk, and I knew there's
Yes.
something special about her.
Yeah, no, she's really good. I think there's one notable person in the cast that we haven't talked about, at least notable in my frame of reference, is Linda, the record company secretary who Nick has a relationship with and who unfortunately
Yes.
catches Harry's eye as well. But that's Pamela Stephenson, or Pamela Stephenson Connolly, as she is now.
Yeah, and she suffers. She suffers in this film.
She
She is
does.
she is so much of a victim of the male-dominated record industry in the 70s
Yes.
that like I'm almost like, is the film trying to make a point? Not really, but
Hmm.
but it's quite disturbing.
It's not really trying to make a point, but it's also like I think they looked out in getting Stevenson for this part because I think it does make this aspect of the film seem deeper than it is. I would describe Pamela Stevenson in her early career when she was in Not the 9 O'Clock News and History of the World Part 1 and things like that. I would describe her as being an implicitly feminist presence in that
Yes.
here is like a woman who's in comedies and she's not there to be sort of lectured after by the men who do all the funny stuff. She is doing the funny stuff. So you sort of read Linda's character in that light, I think.
There's a very interesting scene in which Nick's boss, who is also somewhat notable, and I
Hmm.
will return to because of uh,
Right.
one specific scene which I think you already know what I'm talking about, uh, who
There's a
comes
few
in and
possibilities, but yeah, yeah.
uh, he comes in and says to Nick, "We're thinking of getting you to do a movie score," and
Mm.
Nick says, "I don't feel like I'm able to do that. I can't write music." And Pamela Stevenson's character says, "I can write music, so that's fine." And the boss gives a kind of disgruntled look, and then finally settles for, "I'm sure you can help him." Uh, it's
Yes.
it's quite a good moment. I kind of wish they'd played with it more, but
Yeah.
it's quite a neat little character beat to show some of where the prejudices lie.
Yeah, definitely. The song that he records is
Yes,
absolutely insane, isn't
it
it?
is. It is, and it's plot relevant. It is
I,
plot relevant. The
I
lyrics.
I tried to copy down some of the lyrics as it went by. I couldn't get them all, but it's full of that kind of sort of cod surreal windmills of your mind kind of imagery that easy listening in the 60s had. You know, it's about a man who had a picnic on the moon, the traces
Yes,
of a long forgotten tune, and you just think, what the fuck is
but the
this?
central message of the song, the central
Hmm.
line of the song, which is what made me realize they're doing something slightly clever here.
Yeah.
Slightly, maybe, is what the central line is. You always waited until I fell asleep. There's something along those lines. You waited
Yeah.
until I fell asleep to cry.
Ah,
And the ghost attacks happen when he's sleeping at night, and they take the form of crying noises from the walls.
yes, they do. And his manager suggests his manager has some wonderfully crap explanations for this. He says it's local kids, and Nick says, "Well, the house is in the middle of nowhere." So Webster's manager says, "Oh, they're cats." And you
I
think
don't know any
you
cats that sound like old men joking. I mean, maybe I do. Who knows? Cats make weird noises.
I just thought you could be the skeptic on one of Danny Robbins's podcasts with work like this.
Indeed.
But
And
what was the Webster scene you wanted to mention?
oh, I'm talking about the Webster scene where he does drag. There is a scene where they turn up. there is a bizarre red herring scene. There are a lot of red herrings. I think every single character is implied at some point to be the killer,
Yes, yes,
apart from Nick, who is somehow not led for us to believe that, or any of the characters within the film, nobody believes that he is possibly the murderer, despite him behaving suspiciously and holding a bloody axe in one scene
the
in
victim
front
being
of
his ex-wife.
yes, in front of
Yeah,
his producer as well. Uh, and but Webster's a bit funny because the scene which set him up is there's just a scene where they make a house call to see him, and he's just doing drag in his bedroom, uh, and just doesn't answer the door, and the scene goes by and is never referenced again. But it literally only exists to say, "Ooh, but he could be the hag." Don't you know
yes.
he could be the hag? And this, I also need to fit in the fact that have you ever seen a film called Curtains?
I never have. No.
Curtains is a really brilliant, obscure 80s slasher film which desperately needs a proper UK release. Absolutely phenomenal stuff about a group of women auditioning for a film role under this horrible Harvey Weinstein-esque boss. Uh, but the killer in that wears this horrifying old hag mask and wields a scythe. And
Right.
instantly I was just like, oh, when I saw this, because I was just thinking, no way there's two films which do this so specifically. And sure, the killer doesn't wield a scythe outside of the opening scene, but it's such an image. I wonder if the
Yes.
people who made Curtain saw it and thought, yeah, we need to make more use of that, because it's wonderful.
I think so. Yeah, that does sound very specific. I mean, the hag is a sort of combination of two tropes, isn't it? The fact that it is very obviously a disguise, and the
Oh
film
yeah,
wants you to recognise that it's a disguise, otherwise it doesn't work as a whodunit. So it has this element still of psycho in the mix.
oh,
Uh,
there's more than that in the psycho elements, but
well,
we
yes,
will discuss that further on.
yeah. But it also links it back to that hagsploitation cycle of,
Oh
Hush
yeah,
Hush Sweet Charlotte and things like that.
I,
But
I
it's,
think
yeah.
I think the strangest moment involving the hag, uh,
Mm,
after leaving the corpse to rot in the room, and this is a moment later on when Harry discovers the body.
mm.
Uh, the hag comes up and kills him with a knife, and then the hag gets out a bucket and mop and mobs the entire derelict building from top to bottom. And I don't fully know what the deal with that is, aside from just more wacky fuckery.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to believe that the killer is like getting rid of evidence when they've left a dead body to moulder for God knows how long there.
They instantly decide now's the time to clean up. It's like
Yeah,
to refer not to have too many friends from Embrace of a Vampire, but it's like living in a student house. Like, how many pots of mold does it take for you to realize that now is the time to clean up?
yeah. Yeah, maybe it's just one of those things where you don't clean up in a while and suddenly it hits you. Oh, I've
Oh,
still got the body out and
somebody.
everything.
Maybe it was the rats that did it.
Maybe.
Maybe want to keep don't want to have the neighbors saying I've got a messy messy crack house apartment.
That's it. Yeah, they're bringing property prices in the region down with this shit.
If you see someone turning up wearing the hag mask and shawl, you know that prices are going down in your area.
Bad neighborhood. Move on. Yeah. But yeah, we have to talk, I think, about who the killer is and what their motivations are, because we've circled
Indeed,
around it a lot. So,
killers, I might
killer,
add.
yes, absolutely. It's the one thing in the film because you're right to say that as a mystery, it's set up surprisingly efficiently. There's a lot of red herrings. It's quite sort of craftily done. You have the additional thread of whether Nick is a reliable witness to any of this stuff, because certainly everyone believes he's going crazy.
Nurse told him he's mental.
That's why we put you in the loony bin, innit?
They say it to his face. Everyone said you're crazy. I don't care if you see some ghosts, you're crazy. I don't care if you found your wife's head in the basement in a hat box, like Disney Haunted Mansion style.
Yes. Oh,
They didn't even have the materials for a hat box in the house. They didn't have any paper.
Nope.
A real plot point in this film, I might have to add, they didn't have the materials to make a hat box in the house. It's something which is explicitly said.
But that's the odd thing, isn't it? Everything is very fastidiously set up except for the killer's motive, which is sort of pulled out of nowhere as far as I could tell.
There's a brief reference earlier on when Sheila Keith is asked if she has any children, or if there's anyone else in the house because of the meat woman.
Yeah.
And she responds saying, no, we married in later life. But there's a slight air of extra sadness to it when she says that.
Yeah.
And she's like, there's no one else in the house. No, we can't have children. We married in later life. There's no way. So when it gets revealed that she and her husband, Mr. and Mrs. B, have been behind the murders and also an extensive period of gaslighting in the house, then Sheila Keith, she delivers what might be, look, I know it comes kind of out of nowhere. She presents what might be the greatest scene in the film, simply because it's Sheila Keith.
Yeah.
Simply because it's her, where she talks about the real reason why she has him in the house.
Magazines, all this knowledge of his work, yes.
It's because her daughter was a mega fan, and when he got married, she killed herself, and now these parents have this vendetta against him.
Yes.
And now they're going to murder him, but they have a very specific plan. It's very clear. It's noticeable that Mr. B has been the one going around in the hag mask. Why has he been going around in a hag mask? Who cares? It's cool.
Yes.
But he's also a little overexcitable. There's a bit where he swings an axe, because they both have axes during this scene, and corner him in a corner of the house, which, by the way, I have to mention that this house looks extraordinarily like the one that I filmed Slaughter Alley in, which is a film I'm in, which is meant to come out, and I was confused by the layout being essentially the same for a lot of it, but it's not the same house. I had to check. Although, weirdly, the dining room in that house also looked like the one from Frightmare, so the connections come together. But it's notable that the husband takes a swing at Jack Jones, and she says, "Not yet. I'm not finished." And she goes on this brilliant monologue, like, "Have you ever seen a child die from strychnine poisoning?" It's phenomenal.
There's some really good character details in that too. I love that she's talking about him having this dirty stage act, and it tells you so much about Mrs. B's sensibility, because there is no way that you can imagine Jack Jones being like a sort of outrageous Jim Morrison style figure.
Oh yeah, and I have this suspicion all the way through, because having not seen House of Whipcord and House of Mortal Sin, I have a feeling that she typically in those films plays these conservative moralistic types with kind of this firebrand of vengeance upon anything unnatural and perverse. So seeing
Yeah.
her a massive fan over this pop music that the youngins love these days had me slightly suspicious, and now you see her like slut shaming his dead wife and,
Yeah.
and kind of, oh my, it's then you see it in there, and then she shouts, "Kill the bastard!" And this scene makes me want to love the movie because just
Yeah.
Sheila Keith suddenly dropping all pretenses and shouting "Kill the bastard" to her husband is. It brings back the delights of her performance as a manic yet strangely polite cannibal uh, in Frightmare who like licks crispy ashen skin off a fire poker. She brings that derangement to the scene. And then immediately her clumsy fucking husband axes her in the chest and she dies. She drops fucking dead immediately in comic fashion. And it's quite sad because then the husband just gives up on trying to do any more murders. And then we find the shrine. Then there's the
Yeah.
shrine. Well, before that, Jack Jones picks up an axe covered in blood in front of a bleeding elderly woman who was supposedly his butler, and is a suspect. And he is a suspect in this, by the way. And his boss walks in and says, "Oh, morning, morning. What's that? You got an axe? Oh, oh." No, nothing wrong with that. Go upstairs, why don't you? And when there's a
I
missing
mean,
woman.
once again, this guy is a manager in the British music industry in the 1970s. He has
Yeah.
a protocol for situations like this.
I mean, they explicitly. There's quite an interesting moment as well earlier on. Like, I keep thinking of really interesting parts of this film. Like, even though I'm mostly not that infused with it, I was mostly just not very infused with what the film chose to prioritize in regards to Jack Jones's character and
Yeah.
the slightly questionable romance. But there's a scene where he's just got out of hospital following his mental breakdown, and he listens
Mm.
to himself on the radio, one of his songs being played, and they say, "Congratulations for getting out of hospital with your bad back." And
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
it's an interesting little thing about the PR cover up here. I think it's quite interesting and
yeah. I
says a
think
lot.
it's full of good little details like that. Even though I'm not entirely sure that the sort of that it works fully as a film, but it has
Oh
these
no.
wonderful little granular details of British life and the British music industry in its time. Yeah. Um.
And then there is. And so he hears Jack Jones's character Nick. He hears basically his love interest throughout this goes missing on one of
Mm,
the nights, and nobody really seems to care. As of the wife beforehand, probably not intentional commentary, but it's quite
it's there.
something.
Yeah.
And he hears a screaming still in the house, even though it's been revealed that the ghost appearances were mostly just bizarre gaslighting feet mystery meat.
Yeah.
Uh, but then he hears screaming from inside the wall and
Yeah.
this tapping, which he follows in very, very inconsistent sound quality up to the top, and then Jack Torrance style smashes through a wall
Yeah.
with the axe he's holding, and he finds, holy fuck, the bizarre shrine bedroom of the daughter,
Yes.
who is a dead skeleton on the bed, uh, as it is revealed that, in fact, they weren't planning originally on taking an axe swing at him. They were planning on bricking him into the house and making
Yes.
him part of the scene so that they could provide him to their daughter. What the fuck?
That's good. Yeah, it's sort of like if Edgar Allan Poe had written that episode of I'm Alan Partridge where he meets his biggest fan. It's the midpoint between those.
Yes, it's. I was looking at this. It's strangely similar to scenes in numerous other films, often of the Italian variety.
Mm-hmm.
I can't help but think of the preserved dining room on Christmas Day from Deep Red. Oh,
Oh yeah,
even
yeah.
more so from the obscure American slasher film Butcher Baker Nightmare Maker, with the woman who keeps her headless husband's body in an attic room, kind of permanent, where his body is a skeleton, but his head is pickled in a jar at the end of the bed. All of these weird shrine scenes. That's a phenomenally weird film.
Well, that's directed. Anyone who follows me on Letterboxd will may know that I've been thinking about Butcher Baker Nightmare Maker recently because it's from the director of Beach Blanket Bingo.
Is it now?
It is,
Oh, the
yes.
beach movies make their way into this. Did Pete
Oh
Walker
yeah.
ever do a beach movie?
He didn't. He had lots of early sex comedies, but there wasn't really a beach movie scene in Britain. His first film was called
Oh,
For Men Only, which was also known as I Like Birds.
was
Uh,
it now? That is very Pete Walker.
There is a
I
fabulous moment in terms of him alternating the sex comedies and the slashers, where his 1970 film Cool It Carol was followed up immediately by Die Screaming, Marianne, which
indeed.
mixed messages, I think.
Carol is allowed to cool it, but not Marianne. Marianne just gets to die. There's some great titles in there. Weirdly, I
Definitely.
think that the comeback, though obviously it has its Mrs. Bates moment, and I'm not
Yeah.
talking about the meat lady, is bizarrely 2 years beforehand, Pete Walker released a film called Schizo. So quite frankly, I'm not sure you can get more blatant than that.
Not really.
Having not seen the film, I can't
Hmm.
confirm. However, you never know. You never
I
know with
yeah,
P.T.
I don't
Walker.
I don't think anyone is going to sue you for saying the director of the comeback has probably been influenced by Psycho. I think legally that is a very safe
I
statement
am
to
pretty
make.
certain he has been. I have a distinct suspicion.
Yes.
But
So,
yes,
is there anything else that we haven't mentioned before we round it off? Because
well, there's a couple of
we've
things.
covered some territory.
We need to talk about the ending. We need to
Yeah,
talk about the very ending,
yeah,
where everything's seemingly resolved. And then standing outside the house, trying to figure out things, uh, Nick looks up at the window and sees his wife's ghost.
yeah.
It's
Implying that, she really was trying to warn him and it wasn't all gaslighting by the
or he's
babies.
lost it.
Oh, he's mad. Yeah, there is
Yeah,
that.
either is possible. Maybe she was the hamburger lady. Maybe that was
Maybe.
her. But
Yeah.
he just he gets asked if he sees anything. He's like, nope, nope. They're gonna send me to they're gonna send me to the mental hospital if I say, yeah, I see my wife. Nobody, just my
I
wife. And then it ends on a magic eye picture, pretty much, because it has the weirdest transition to black I have ever seen, where it's just like, fuck you, 70s audiences, enjoy the eye strain when we move out of this.
Yeah, I can see him being motivated to not talk about that vision or ghost or whatever because you do not want to wake up in a bed with the June Chadwick hovering over you. Got potty again, have you?
Indeed. Now, I need to know what connection you thought I was talking about between this and Embrace of the Vampire.
Well, it occurred to me when you said this that this is the second film in a row we've seen with a villain who can effectively change gender.
It's true. It
Yeah.
is essentially true. I
It must be said the process in the comeback is slightly cruder than the one in Embrace of the Vampire, but it's
yeah,
still there.
potentially it's just like just standing there. It's a now I am become Joan Crawford, destroyer of face. But yeah, it's I am fascinated with just I really don't know what the decision was to make the killer grandma's off her meds again, but I'm really into it.
Yeah.
I do have a definite soft spot for the exploitation genre. Perhaps exploitative, sure, but they give an opportunity for older actresses to just completely go off their shit, and
Yeah.
it's it's delightful. I think, particularly with Sheila Keith in Frightmare, where she just gets to completely say, "Oh, you expect me to play this nice quiet role because I'm older? Nah, nah. I'm gonna eat brains. I'm gonna eat brains. I'm gonna have a family dinner eating brains. There is a family reunion and they eat someone's brain. It happens in that film. It's a wonderful movie. That's probably a spoiler. I don't care. Watch Frightmare. That's that's the lesson of this. Watch Frightmare.
It might be a spoiler, but let's face it, if you're going to get people to watch it, you might as well give them the goods.
It is, yeah. Sheila Keith. Sheila Keith eats someone's brain. It's great.
There we go. That's the film.
She gets them in post.
But yes, so if you enjoyed this podcast, you can donate to our Patreon, where you get a monthly bonus episode of this very show. Robyn has been on a very memorable one of those about .com for murder.
The greatest film ever made, .com for murder.
Of course, yeah. Where
Ruined
was it
my
in
life.
Titan Sound Top 100 again?
I would be so tempted to add it. If anybody ever... I've already said that if anybody mistrusts me to do it, if there's a chance I'll put Lair of the White Worm on there, which is a film I legitimately adore, by the way. But
yeah.
I would be tempted to just drop something like .com for murder on there and say, yeah. I mean, what was it? Harmony Korine put the entirety of TikTok as one of his choices. So quite frankly, it wouldn't be the weirdest thing that someone has suggested for Sight and Sound.
No, definitely not. But as well as that, you also get a load of other wonderful things, written reviews of classic cult TV, reviews of Asian films that lack a UK distributor, our other podcast from the video aisle, which looks back at the entirety of cult, horror and science fiction franchises, and last night a podcast about everything we've watched in the preceding month. That's all at www.patreon.com/The Geek Show. We'll be back with the second of our 3 Halloween episodes in a fortnight's time. Until then, I've been Graham.
And I've been Robyn.
And we'll see you in 2 weeks.